Welcome to the World of DaaS, a show for data enthusiasts. I'm your host, Auren Hoffman, CEO of SafeGraph and GP of Flex Capital. For more conversations, videos, and transcripts, visit safegraph.com/podcasts. Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Nick Thompson. Nick is the CEO of The Atlantic. Prior to that, he was the editor-in-chief of Wired and the senior editor of The New Yorker. He's also the co-founder of Speakeasy AI, a platform for civil discourse online. Nick, welcome
Thank you,
to
Auren.
World
It's
of DaaS.
lovely to be here.
I'm very excited to dive in. Now, you've covered tech for a long time. You started at Wired, I think, in 2005. And tech used to have a very different relationship with the media than it does today. How do you think that transition's played out, and why has it happened?
That's one of sort of the existential questions of my time at Wired. It got much, much worse, right, as the question presupposes. When I was there in 2005, there's tension, of course, because sometimes you write difficult stories, sometimes you write positive stories, but there wasn't outright hostility. And the outright hostility, it seemed to me, started in around, I would say, if I had to choose a date, I would say the election of Trump, which of course is a political moment, but it's not directly tied to the tech industry.
Okay, so really you're saying, 2012, 2013, 2014, tech still has still a good relationship.
Tech still has a good relationship with the media. It's not perfect, but I don't think it really turned sour.
Of course, yeah.
Until after that election. So then the question is, why? Why would a political election change a dynamic between an industry and the media? My sense is that a few things happened at the time. So one of the underlying problems was Twitter. And Twitter is a place where the tech industry over-indexes and journalists over-index. And Twitter is also a place that tends to drive people to extreme positions and make people say the worst things that they might say. And then not only that, you only see the people who say the worst things. So suddenly the tech industry, spending all this time on Twitter, sees kind of the most outrageous things that the journalists are saying, right? And the most political things the journalists are saying, and starts to not trust them. And the journalists start to see the most outrageous things that the venture capitalists are saying. So you start to have like two people who could probably get along, as represented on Twitter, don't get along. So that's one underlying factor. Second thing that happens is after the election of Trump, the media starts to see the tech industry as part of the problem that created what had happened in American politics. They had the sense that Trump had been elected because of Facebook, because of Twitter. And then not only that, the media, particularly a younger generation of media, began to feel that it was part of the responsibility of this industry to kind of fix the problems of the country. And it became a more, idealistic would be the positive word, politicized would be the negative word, but there was definitely more of a feeling that the point of journalism wasn't just to tell the stories and tell every side of every story, but to actually shift the world in a certain direction. And that attitude came to coverage of tech, and the tech industry began to get a little upset. Then the third thing that happened is that the tech industry discovered that because of Twitter, because of podcasts, they didn't need media as much. And so the tech industry starts they could tell their own stories. Andreessen Horowitz starts its own publication. They could tell their own stories in their own ways and not have to deal with pesky reporters who were saying things they didn't like. So you have all those trends come together, plus a few other ones, but that happened and the relationship got pretty testy.
In 2008 and 2009, there were a lot of stories about how tech helped the Obama team get elected, and there were very positive stories because, most of the reporters probably more on the Obama team. And 2016 comes and kind of like the story is, okay, well, the tech helped, maybe helped this different team get elected, or at least the different team took advantage of tech. And it did seem that the Trump campaign took a lot more advantage of tech than the Clinton campaign, who was much more like TV kind of based out there. Do you think that was part of the thing? It's just like, okay, well, there's a different team benefiting from this new technology now?
Yeah, it pains me a little bit to say team, just because I feel like journalism needs to, as much as possible, not be on a team. It needs to be able to divorce itself from that. It needs to not have political biases. But of course it does. And of course your question is correct. That, it's interesting. The people who dominate the tech industry and the people who dominate the media industry have a lot in common, right? The tech industry is focused. It's, an unfortunate amount of it is in San Francisco, Washington, New York, Seattle, Boston, and the media industry, an
Yeah.
unfortunate amount of it is in San Francisco, New York, Washington, Seattle, Boston, right? The tech industry, an unfortunate number of the graduates went to Ivy League schools, are highly educated. The same thing in the media industry. And so they come from, similar places. They get funneled from the whole country through similar institutions into similar cities, and they're friends in their social circles. And so that group of people also were the people who are in the Obama White House. And so there's a real mix. And then Trump comes in, whole different group of people backing him, whole group of different people working with him, and, splits it up a little bit. And then, as you say, the journalism industry raises an eyebrow at what tech has done. And, a less cynical way of putting it would be not so much that Trump was elected, but that there was this hypothesis at Facebook that Facebook and that technology would lead the world to greater understanding and greater community, and Facebook will be a platform that brings people together. And then the fact that Trump, who, whether you like him or don't like him, is not a candidate who's focused on bringing the world together, bringing America together. He's a candidate focused on his particular viewpoint and succeeding with it. The fact that he was able to use Facebook made people question the whole premise of tech.
And some of the stories that the press wrote about, like tech and the Trump White House, in retrospect, did seem to be incredibly wrong. Like the Cambridge Analytica story seemed in some ways to have very little fact behind it. And just seemed like many people, even some of the very best reporters, like got some of the very biggest stories wrong. Like, why do you think that happened? Was it just so overwhelming, that people were feeling so overwhelmed in those years? Or why do you think I think part of the reason tech felt that they needed to break away more from the press was that the press was constantly getting these stories.
The Cambridge Analytica one is super interesting because the underlying facts weren't wrong, right? The underlying facts that this company had done this thing for this reasons, and that was all true. The consequences were wildly overstated, right? Cambridge Analytica had no effect on the election.
Yeah. But still, to this day, if you ask like most people, even in the press, they'll say, "Oh, it did. It was the." It's like they don't even know the real story. Even very smart people.
The truth is that Trump was able to use Facebook. He's really good at Facebook ad targeting, which any marketer,
right?
Anyone could have used.
In
fact, the underlying problem there was, Hillary Clinton had all of these sort of really smart folks from the tech industry, and they're trying to build their own AI models of voter modeling. Trump has, his former caddy, and he's like, let's buy Facebook ads. And it just turns out the Facebook ads work much better. It wasn't Cambridge Analytica. The other thing I'll say about that Cambridge Analytica story, it was the conclusion, right, that Facebook is a massive privacy violator because of Cambridge Analytica is wrong. The conclusion that Facebook was a massive privacy violator was correct. And so in some ways, it was like Facebook was being overpunished for other previous sins. But you're right that oftentimes when you're inside of something, as the tech industry was, and you read the reporting on it, you realize, wait, that's wrong. So there were things absolutely where the tech industry saw journalism getting it wrong, but journalism also got a lot of stuff right. I mean, I was in the middle of a lot of that Facebook reporting, and there was a lot of stuff the company hid that came out that was important and was true.
One of the, at least in my experience, whenever I read stories that I don't know, when I don't have the intimate knowledge about, I usually presume that they're correct. But whenever I read the stories that I have intimate knowledge about, they're always wrong. I've almost never read a complicated story where I have intimate knowledge about where they're even remotely correct. Why do you think like readers have such cognitive dissonance around that?
You either need to be more generous to the stories that are written about what the stuff you know a lot about, or less generous to the stories you don't know a lot about, or combination of both. From a, one of the things that was interesting to me is, my job has been, I've been a writer, I've been an editor, I've been a bureaucrat, right, or a manager. And when you're a manager, like I was at Wired, you read a lot of stuff from the same perspective you were just describing, where people are writing about what's going on at Wired, or where they were writing about what's going on at the New Yorker, and you realize, wait, it's so wrong, right? My God, how like, and so then if you take that though, and you take that to your reporting, it makes you report with more humility. So I wrote, I don't know, let's say 30,000 words about Facebook with my colleague Fred Vogelstein during those times. And we would go and we would take our stories, and I would read every sentence out loud to different parts, to different people, to people who I thought would disagree with the premises, just to say, what is wrong with this premise? Do you hear anything? And, I think it's a very helpful strategy, not necessarily reading it out loud. I would often, if I ever had a story that I was writing that had a political bent to it, I would either, read it to my stepfather, my very conservative stepfather, or I would try to like think about how he would read it, right? And like, okay, let's look at the premises, let's look at the word choices, let's see. And actually, it's a really useful skill for journalists, which is to think about the smartest, fairest person who would disagree with all your premises and all your conclusions, right? And would be angry that you're writing this story. Think about how they're going to read it. And just, you don't have to change it to please them, right? You have to get as close as you can to the truth. And maybe they don't like it because they're trying to hide the truth. But make sure you're getting it as right as possible from that perspective. Because if you just are writing for your filter bubble and you're only thinking about the reactions inside your filter bubble, that's what leads you to make those mistakes, where someone outside of the filter bubble or outside of that information bubble will look at it and say, wait, what the heck have they done? And that's something I wish that journalism did more.
And I've known you, and you are really one of the people that really does this and really kind of thinks through this thing. But I do think that's extremely rare even in journalism, even from, even if you read Wired today, or you read, you name your publication today, Vice, or some of these publications, they do seem to put out a lot of stuff that's more opinion than fact. Sometimes trying to get more clicks, they're trying to get more eyeballs, they're trying to sensationalize it. They try to pick the most sensational headline, usually, right? The one that's going to attract people from, as you mentioned, from Twitter, et cetera. That somewhat obscures the thing. And it seems like everyone is, or not, maybe not everyone, because I know that you're not, but it seems like a lot of people are kind of complicit with this behavior. Is there any way of like breaking out of it?
This is going back to your first question about the tech industry. I always used to laugh at this because Facebook, the way the Facebook algorithm worked and the way the Twitter algorithm worked is it would drive you to extremism, it would drive you to write clickbait headlines. It would drive you, all your incentives were to kind of push out the most controversial content you can. And so when it came to covering the tech industry's own algorithms are part of what incentivized the coverage that drove them crazy.
True. So, good point. Yeah. It's part of the problem. Tech is part of the problem.
Why did the Cambridge Analytica story, go so viral? Because Facebook's algorithms love outrage. And so I would always laugh. That's, I guess, the other cause of this problem that you described. But what's so interesting is, let's watch what happens with the news industry the next few years, because Facebook is no longer a significant referral source, right? Twitter is much less. They are significant referral sources, but they are vastly less important to the economics of this industry than they were 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 8 years ago. Google is still hugely important, but Google doesn't reward outrage the way Facebook and Twitter did. So I wonder whether, with the underlying incentives changing to the news industry, maybe the stories will change, and then maybe the tech industry will like media again.
Well, but now a lot of people, are more driven by subscribers, and subscribers often love outrage.
Maybe. That is, to me, the most interesting question of my industry, the most interesting unanswered question. And so when I was at the New Yorker, so I worked at Wired, then I went to the New Yorker, then I went back to Wired, and I came here to the Atlantic. When I was at the New Yorker, it was unquestionably the case that the thing that drove subscriptions was getting people to read across the publication, right? If they read fiction and then they read politics,
5 articles.
But if they read in the same category, right? If they read 5 political stories, they wouldn't subscribe. They would only subscribe if they read politics.
Oh, interesting.
Or not, would, but they were much more likely. Same thing was true at Wired. And so if you believe that, then your goal isn't to kind of drive people into narrower and narrower political channels. It's to broaden it.
Yeah.
Now, it's also the case that during the Trump years, it seemed as though the publications that went hardest on politics had the most success driving subscriptions. The New York Times
Yep.
and the Washington Post, they went extremely hard on Trump. So the question is, in the post-Trump era, I feel like driving outrage, driving people, I think it's kind of changing back to the way it was in 12 to 16, where actually you don't get subscriptions by driving outrage. You get subscriptions by providing a breadth of really good information across topics. That's my guess, at least for general interest publications like the ones I've more or less worked on.
Yeah, that might be true. For people who have like maybe a Substack column, it does seem a little. One of my friends who has a very popular Substack column, when they write about more red meat topics type of thing, they get a lot new subscribers. When they write things that are a little bit more nuanced or more balanced, sometimes they lose subscribers. And so they don't always want to write the red meat topics, but there's like an economic incentive for them to write things. And it even could be like this. It's even boring for them because it could be like the same story they've written 10 times. It's like, oh, I just put the 11th story. It's the exact same story, the exact same thing, but I know it will up my subscriber numbers a bit.
I bet you that's true for Substack, right? Because you've got to stick out. There's so many Substacks, like it leads to virality, all that. I wonder if it's true for the New York Times, right? And if I were to pull up, right? I mean, I can pull it up and I can show you the stories that have driven the most subscriptions at The Atlantic over the last, I'll just pull whatever dashboard I have. And while it's loading, the question at the Times would be, are they getting more subscribers from like, I don't know, Jamel Bouie's column or from like Brett Stevens's, right? Or are they getting more from their, their story about Trump in the CNN town hall and how outrageous it was, or for their, more balanced coverage of whatever it is? I don't know. I mean, from The Atlantic, I can tell you that, our politics cover. I mean, The Atlantic has, for a media outlet based in New York and Washington, has extremely broad political coverage. We have a whole number of Republicans who write for us. We try extremely hard to follow the old mantra of, of no party or clique, upon which this publication was founded. Hold on, let me just pull. All right.
But the Atlantic is a rare bird in a way, right? It's a maybe like many publications, it maybe most of the staff are on the left or center left, but there are quite a few people on the center right who are part of it, and it is a fairly bigger tent. But I don't. And, maybe The Economist is like that too, but there aren't a ton of publications that kind of fit the same mold as The Atlantic.
Okay, here goes. So I've got top converting stories the last 7 days. Number one is how rural America steals girls' futures. Ted Lasso has lost its way. $1 billion Ponzi scheme. What really happened to Malaysia's missing airplane? That's an old one. The story that we wrote about child separation, the outer limits of liberalism. So there's no political red meat in that whole list. Those are all sophisticated, long, complicated, interesting stories. That's what's driving subscribers here.
But if I had a stereotype the average Atlantic subscriber, they do seem to be more stereotype as the person is the rare person who maybe doesn't want the red meat. And so, again, if you and maybe you would have said that about the New York Times person 20 years ago, but today you would say this is the person who actually really wants the red meat and who like viciously hates certain types of people and stuff. So, these things. And so there is a niche, of course, and The Atlantic is a niche, but The Atlantic is a great business, but it's not it's not the $100 billion type of media business.
Well, Auren, you just wait.
I mean, I think it will great if we had that many people that really cared about that type of thing.
Our subscribers, we went from 400,000 3 years ago. We're at 900,000 now. I mean, the publications, we're not in the
that's
9-figure revenue. We're not in the 12-figure revenue. What did you say? 100 billion? We're not there yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now you've thought a lot about how AI is going to affect journalism. Where do you think
it's going to affect journalism hugely, and it's going to affect it in all kinds of ways, right? So we are talking 1 day or 2 days after Google I/O, where, you're starting to see that chat will be fully integrated into search. So as I mentioned before, Google is the core referral source of all of media, right? We get a plurality, if not a majority, of our traffic on some days from Google. And if Google search changes so that it's chat-based, not link-based, then that has a huge impact on the number of readers we have. Now, you're not going to lose half your readers, but you're going to lose some percentage, right? So we have to model out and we have to scenario. I mean, you've seen the readership numbers from Stack Overflow, right? Somebody was telling me that Stack Overflow, now that chat is replacing, that OpenAI is replacing a lot of it. It's like 15% a month or something. I was told yesterday. I don't know if that's true, but I was told that yesterday. So journalism. So we'll have a referral issue, right? So that's issue number one, modeling that out. Number two, there's going to be an interesting question of like, what are the startups that are totally AI news generating, right? You're going to have a lot of new publications out there that are just using chat to write all their stories and to summarize the news, and you'll have newsletters and you'll have aggregators, and they won't be able to do. Right? I just mentioned that Caitlin Dickerson story about the child separation policy, right? It's 30,000 words. Like, how many FOIA requests did she file? She worked on it for a year, right? You can't possibly do that right now with an AI bot, like maybe GPT 32, right? But you're not gonna be able to do it with GPT 5. So there are things that we do that won't be replaceable. But what happens to the whole news industry, right? So that's
though for Caitlin, I mean, she might be way more efficient with it. Maybe they could auto write her FOIA requests, and it could help her process the data faster, and and all those. So maybe a story that would have taken her a year now takes her 6 months.
If you can auto file your FOIA request, that is exactly right. So that's kind of the category 3. Like, what are the efficiencies it brings to us? It'll bring to every industry, but the publications that take the best use of it and use it in the most honest and clear ways, and explain what they're doing, what they're not doing. There are also all kinds of features that we'll be able to build into, whether it's subscriber onboarding. We're trying to figure out whether we can, answer some of our help queries, right? Like, not the live conversations with our reps, but we have an index of sort of common problems, like with your subscription, whether we can write all those. So there are going to be lots of tools that we use. There are going to be ways that it makes us more efficient, right? I use it all the time to learn or figure out problems or whatever I'm trying to figure out. I used it to write a whole children's book for my kids for his birthday. We printed it out. It's really great. It was so much fun.
Amazing.
It's a story. I mean, it's an interesting example where every night for more or less every night for years, I've been telling him a story about the Animal World Cup, right? Which is this fictional World Cup where different teams of species play against each other, right? So bears play against the slugs, right? And we come up with these hilarious ways that they kick the soccer ball, and they have characters. And then so I have 3 boys. The middle boy and I used AI, and then also used sort of our memories of these stories to create a book. And then we used DALL-E and Stable Diffusion to create the art of like a slug on a soccer ball, the bears. It was awesome. We printed it out. So they're like all kinds of cool storytelling use cases. So for journalism, it's a combination of what it does to the overall market, what it does to the way we create journalism, what it does to the way we operate and our efficiencies, what it does to advertising. Right? We make a lot of our money from a branded content studio, figuring out how it can incorporate AI. So all kinds of changes across the board. My view has very much been, and I wrote about this and put it on LinkedIn, and I sent a note to the staff. Look, somewhat frightening, right? AI is the most powerful information processing tool that's ever come about. And we're in the information business. But maybe it changes things for the worse. Maybe it changes things for the better. But we need to go into this with excitement and optimism and a spirit of experimentation. And we need to look at all the ways we can use it, always disclose what we're doing, but we need to go in, not, hey, wait, what's this doing? Let's kind of yell at it. Let's go in and let's just use it and see what happens, right? And we'll know in a year more than we know right now, but it's a pretty amazing time to be a journalist interested in AI and to be covering this and to be using these tools. They're mind-blowing.
For some of these things where you may have a story, and then you've got images on that story, and then you've got you have ways of summarizing that story with graphs, and then you may be creating like a video about the story, right? So if you think of most stories, there's got many different forms of media, and then you may be creating social media posts and stuff like that. It seems like a lot of once the story is written, it does seem a lot of the other stuff could be easily done by good AI tools. How does that affect in some ways the jobs that you need or the types of
Yeah.
people that you want. Maybe even the person who wrote that story who never did any of the other stuff could actually do all the other types of things as well.
I'm gonna step a little. I'm gonna take a few steps backwards and point out that I'm the CEO. I'm not the editor in chief. Editor in chief, totally different reporting structure. He makes and has final say over all decisions over how journalists do everything having to do with AI. We'll have an editorial policy. My policy is just for the business side, right? I mean, he and I, we get along fabulously. We talk all the time. We agree on all kinds of things. But I don't want to step onto that territory. But I will say that, I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book about running. So, in some ways I still have writing responsibilities. There are definitely all kinds of tools. When that book comes out into the world, I will probably, be thinking about writing my promotional copy and figuring out, like, using AI to help me figure out what podcasts I want to go on to talk about the book, or different ways I can frame it, and, helping me figure out different ways to sort of help the promotional infrastructure. So yeah, absolutely. Right. There are all kinds of things that can come from it.
Yeah. Okay. Really interesting. Where do you, if you think of media as a business, there's been a lot of these venture-backed companies, BuzzFeed, Vox, Vice, that, maybe had some troubles, while you had some others like Axios, Politico, which did much, much better. Like, how do you think this kind of like venture-backed business is going to work in the future?
I was wondering if you did a regression analysis of media companies over the last 20 years or 15 years, and you were to track success and failure, I wonder whether, there's the perception that the ones that were venture-backed are the ones that, have really struggled. And that it's because the venture capital industry demanded a kind of growth that wasn't possible on media. It's because they really leaned into the tech platforms. But I actually don't think that's true. I think if you were to parse it out, it's the companies that really bet heavily on scale and advertising are the ones that struggled, right? That's what BuzzFeed and Vox have in common. Axios, right? They're going direct to consumer, right? They're doing newsletters. They're building personal relationships. The information has done fabulously, right? They're going direct to individuals, like, pay us $300 and we'll tell you tech news you didn't know, and we'll build networks beyond that. So I think that it's less venture funding that has been hard for the journalism industry, and more advertising and scale. And the reason advertising and scale is hard is because the scale has gone away as the social platforms have backed away from the news industry, right? Facebook decided it wanted to give tons of traffic to the news industry because it was scared of Twitter. And then Twitter never actually became a rival to Facebook. Facebook succeeded. Then Facebook was like, why are we giving all this traffic to the news industry when the news industry is so mean to us? And also, I'm not sure our people want it, so forget it, right? So then they kind of jettison and so all the companies that have been built on the promise of massive Facebook traffic are in trouble. And then secondly, advertising, the tech industry, this is one of the misperceptions that bugs me about journalism, is they're always like, wow, Facebook and Google stole our ad business. No, they built a better ad business, right? It's like, you used to advertise in Wired because it's the only place to reach people who love tech, or it's the best place to reach people who love tech. Now you can go into Facebook and say, reach people who like tech, or you can go into Google and say, reach people who are searching for this. And, journalism didn't have as good an advertising mechanism. Now, there's certain kinds of advertising that we can do wonderfully, brand enhancements, but there's a whole category that, was swept away. And that's just capitalism. And so anyway, so the media companies that built on this incredible scale advertising, that's a hard business to be in, particularly when the platforms go away. So I think that's my answer.
And it is also interesting where, if you think of Wired, they have kind of two types of ads that are there. They've got the ones that their sales team sells, and there might be site takeovers or other types of things where, they're very, very bespoke. They're extremely expensive. And then they've got the remnant stuff that they just, put on RTB, and anyone who's just advertising on Google or whatever, or just happens to end up, they don't even know they're advertising on Wired. They don't even want to advertise necessarily on Wired. It could just be for retargeting somebody for shoes, and it shows up there. And it seems like these are like two like incredible
Mm-hmm.
extremes. But what seems to be really driving a lot of like really driving things like Google, Facebook, et cetera, is like these self-serve advertisers that come in and they have the ability to do all this stuff. And it doesn't seem like any of the journalism sites have embraced any of that. I can't just come in and spend like $300 on Wired in a self-serve way and advertise in a I have to spend like hundreds of potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars before a salesperson's going to engage with
Right.
me
Well,
there.
I mean, so there are companies that could have programmatic direct selling, right? And we do a small amount of that at the Atlantic. But it is true that it's really high and low. And the reason for that is, it's funny. The Atlantic, I don't know exact, but let's just make up numbers. Let's make up numbers from some hypothetical publication. Maybe you're selling. Let's say your publication is selling 50% of their ads are programmatic, and 50% of them are direct sold, right? The funny thing is the programmatic CPMs are going to be a 10th, a 20th of the direct sold CPMs, right? So you're going to be making, even though you're selling equal numbers, you're going to be making 10 times or 20 times as much revenue on the direct sold, but you'll probably be making equal amounts of profit because it costs nothing to do the direct sold, right? So the way the publishing industry is set up, which I actually don't think is bad, is you run all these programmatic auctions at essentially zero cost, right? You have one person managing your programmatic auctions, making sure that you have you're plugged into the Google network. And maybe there's some marginal benefit to doing programmatic direct or setting it up so you can buy $300 of World of DaaS publishing or advertising on Wired. But there's also some cost to that because you have to hire another person and maybe you undercut your direct sale. So the way we set it up is just run all these auctions, and then we work really hard for bespoke, custom, wonderful stuff with people who want to enhance their brand with that publication. And is that the most efficient way to do it? I kind of think it might be. It's hard, but you're trying to maximize profit, not revenue. You're trying to make sure you don't cannibalize the high profit stuff. So that's where we are.
No, the immediate business is hard. Like your boss is Lauren Powell Jobs. She doesn't really. I mean, I'm sure she wants to make a profit, but that's not her necessarily. She doesn't need to make a profit, right? Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Like, how do you think about essentially these tech billionaires who are running these news?
Yeah, so I think about it very specifically, which is the way that she told me to think about it, which is, I read the papers. I know that she's worth a lot of money, but she really doesn't want to run this as a charity. She wants to run this as a business, and she wants us to make money. Now, what that means to me is that my incentives to get this thing to break even and break even plus $1 are extremely high. She does not want to write checks, and I want to get us there. And I think we're getting there, right? And that has been, when I was hired, that was very clearly laid out as one of my goals. So unlike another business, right, where once you get to plus $1, well, then you have to get to plus $1 million. I have lower incentives there because the marginal benefit is lower to her, but we definitely run this.
But you want to get to at least profitability, so you don't have to go to her each year and ask her to put more money in. So it's really important to get there. But once you're at profitability, it doesn't need to be like super crazy.
I mean, we have multiple objectives, right? We want to have influence in the world. We want to do the absolute best journalism, but she's not an ATM, right? So I want to and that is, sometimes people don't understand that, or people who want to come work here don't understand this. Why do we have to? Well, we do, and we are going to get to break even, and that's what we're doing. God willing. I mean, market forces could change, but we are on a very good trajectory right
now. Okay, that makes sense. But in some ways, like if you think of her investing in the Atlantic and buying it and putting like probably her financial return of that investment is not going to be great. She probably could have had a better financial return, potentially like putting it in T-bills or something. So it would probably be under the basic T-bill return. Like she's doing, obviously she doesn't want to lose as much money, but she's doing it because she's trying to do good things in the world. There's other reasons. It's not just purely a financial. Whereas for many people, if I'm buying a coal business, I'm probably buying it purely for the financial return.
But remember, so I don't know why she bought it. Like I don't talk about that. But think about it more like, think about it a little bit like a sports team, right? Where you're less interested in the cash it generates every year as you are in at some point, I would imagine she'll sell the Atlantic, right? And the Atlantic will
Yep.
have a value.
And so it could
The
appreciate.
Atlantic will have a value both based on its forward cash returns, forward profits, but also on its like what's the value of owning the Atlantic. And so if you think about her returns,
Yep.
if we are able to run it in such a way that it gets to break even positive, maybe the overall cash returns over the period of time she owns it are less than owning T-bills. But what if the value has accrued a whole bunch? Then maybe it's actually a pretty good deal.
I got it, because it's like a sports team. It's in some ways owning a great media outlet is a luxury good. And just like sports teams don't really make much money. Their cash flow is very, very, very small. For most, some of them don't. Some of them, their cash flow is actually negative. Even like these amazing NBA teams that are out there, but it's a luxury good that it's very important to people to own, and they get to sit on courtside, and there's a lot of value to owning it. And I can imagine from like a media outlet, like there's a lot of cachet of owning and there's not that many out there. There's actually fewer great media outlets than there are sports teams.
What's my incentive? My incentive is to get it to cash flow positive and have a really positive brand. That's the way to accrue value to my owner, right?
Yep.
So try to make it break even
sense.
and don't trash the brand. And so there you go.
Yep. And the brand is really important. That you're, because in some ways that's the value is the brand, and the Atlantic has had a great brand for 150 years or however long it's been around. It's kind of one of those few venerable institutions that has kind of stood the test of time.
Those are the objectives. And also the only other thing I'll say there is that the other reason to have it be break even and work for that is they want that, and Emerson has told me that. But also, like, look at the history of wealthy people buying media organizations, and there's often a lot of enthusiasm. And then if the losses continue, that enthusiasm diminishes, right?
Yep.
And
they
so
back out.
When you are in the situation where you have, a wonderfully smart, benevolent, like she's a fabulous owner, right? We are very fortunate. And I think every single person who works at the Atlantic is grateful that she is the owner of the Atlantic. You look at the past history, you would like her not to get frustrated with owning this place.
Yeah. So you got to treat her right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, speaking of new owners, at least on this recording, I think Twitter has had a new owner for roughly 6 months or so. What's your assessment of how that is going?
I mean, look, obviously some things have gone horribly wrong, right? And I think that what's so interesting about Musk is that, Twitter, he's one of the greatest inventors and most important, engineers and product managers of our lifetime, right? And I've talked to a lot of people who work closely with him, and there's a sense that, no one can look at a problem from first principles and figure out new solutions better than he can, right? And he has this capacity that he's shown in Tesla, that he's shown in SpaceX. Those companies are unbelievable, right? And not only unbelievable companies, but the value that they accrue. Joe Biden just said he wants half the cars in America to be new cars sold to be electric by 2030. Like, that doesn't remotely happen without Elon, and Elon going through, walking across the coals that he walked across for all those years with Tesla, where it looked like there wasn't any chance, and all the decisions they had to make it right. The guy's phenomenal, right? But then, he takes, fame has effects on people, and Twitter has effects on people. And in some ways, it seems like the personality who's come out tweeting is not the person who we saw running, creating Tesla. And I talked about Twitter bringing out the worst in people, and it seems as though there's been a lot of that happening at Twitter. On the other hand, reports that like Twitter is going to die and that, Twitter is going to break and Twitter won't be working by Sunday morning were clearly grossly exaggerated, right? It looks like as of today's Wall Street Journal, maybe we have a new CEO, maybe we have some stability. Like, Twitter will not be the cultural influence that it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I use Twitter much less. There are all kinds of things he did that have really weirded me out, right? I certainly don't stand for a lot of the things he's tweeted, but also rigging the algorithm, make his tweets appear more. There's a lot of stuff that's been pretty gross. On the other hand, I think Twitter is going to, Twitter will still be an important social media entity for a long time to come.
And what do you think of the product itself? You're a student of kind of all these different
Yeah.
products. Like, do you think the
No,
product
I
is
think the
getting
product is
better?
getting worse. I think that the thing I always wanted from Twitter was I wanted a platform where I would be able to connect with people, where I would be able to learn new things, and where I'd be able to have conversations or see information that at the end of the day would make me smarter, right? Or would make me smarter might be the
Yep.
wrong word, but would make my life richer, right? I would have gone on and I would have talked to Auren about something and learned something. I would have seen some beautiful photograph and I would have gotten a link to a story I wouldn't have found otherwise, right? That's a beautiful day on Twitter. And I go on Twitter now and it's it's been TikTokified a little bit, right? You're just seeing like I don't know,
Yep.
there's an elephant on a skateboard or whatever the hell you see, right? Um, and you see a lot more kind of viral crap. You see I think you probably see, I don't know, probably see more kind of toxicity. I think the product is worse, and that's why I use it less. And why is the product worse? Is it because my social network has fragmented and people have left and the people I was most excited about have left? Maybe. Is it because chasing whatever he's chasing, Musk and his team have made it worse? Is it because the trusted safety team got fired and some more toxicity is going through? I'm not sure. But in general, as an experience for this user, the product is worse. What do you think? You think the
Interesting. I
product is
actually,
better?
I think the
Really?
product's
That's
better.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, just like even the little features, just like I appreciate the little features, just the fact that you can like, italicize something. It's like sounds silly, but just like some of these little things that
I
they've
mean, there are like
done.
encrypted DMs,
Um,
right?
and I have found I've just discovering things. Now, I agree with you that some of the videos that you see are a little TikToky, and I don't want to. I'm not going to Twitter to see like dance videos and stuff, and I'm starting to get more of those in my feed. Um, and but in general, like I think it's like the experience has been like I've always been a Twitter fan, but I think the experience has been
Huh.
better today, and I feel like they're getting there. You could see how they're like actually. It seems like every week they're doing some. They're putting out a new feature. They're trying things out. They're doing what a tech company is supposed to do, experimenting with different things. And they do seem willing to change their mind if they put something out and
That's
it's
true.
not really working. They'll like, I was like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And it's tough when you do that in public. Like a lot of times when some of these sites do it, they do it like they do it in like Australia. That's what Facebook does. They like do everything in Australia first, so like nobody finds out about it. It's like just the koala bears using it or something, and then they slowly roll it out to the rest of the world. Whereas where Twitter just does it for everybody. But I
I
could
mean,
definitely see
actually,
your point
look,
as well.
it is absolutely true that Twitter's product team was slow in the past, and like Musk is not slow, right? And new stuff does come out. So if the
Yeah, it's not
product is like
slow.
all the
Yeah,
different tools and the ability to tweet longer and like all that, like today, right? The encrypted DMs, like I think encrypted DMs are
yep,
they're not fully encrypted, right? It's only for Twitter Blue, but like the features, there are features
yeah,
shipping.
yeah. It's cool.
But
It's
the
like it's a
product
cool
of
new
Twitter is
thing.
not like the amalgamation of all these tiny little things. It's like the core newsfeed
Yep.
experience and the percentage of tweets that I see that are actually not tweets that like fire, like give me a sugar rush, but tweets that I actually, if I look back at the day and say, okay, I spent 12 minutes on Twitter, those were a good 12 minutes. Like, what are the odds of that? Probably less than 2 years ago.
Yep. Yep.
But it
Yep.
is
That
nice
might be
to
true.
not have
Now,
Trump there
speaking of,
because not because only because it so dominated the conversation, right? So the problem with Twitter in the Trump years was, regardless of what one thinks about Trump, whether one's for him or whether he's against him, just the percentage of the conversation, which was either people retweeting what he said or people dunking on what he said, that made Twitter unpleasant too. So I'm
it's interesting because like I mainly follow like tech
yeah,
and AI and engineers and stuff like that. So like I even during the peak Trump years, I never saw any of those
God
political tweets,
God bless you.
pro or con. I was more in my own little
Well, the crazy thing,
weird
Auren,
like
is
tech
I like not
silo.
only did I not follow Trump, I muted the word Trump. I muted like every variation of the word Trump, but because I'm connected to so many journalists and so many people in politics, it was still like you still couldn't get away from it.
Good point. Yeah, you're definitely in a different world. Now, speaking of kind of like
Yeah,
having conversations, you co-founded
yeah,
Speakeasy.ai, which is a project to create like an online platform for like
Yep.
real discourse, like, and less toxic discussions. Like, how is that going?
It's
What have you
amazing.
learned from that?
I can't talk about all of it because we're still, we're about to bust out in the open with the new iteration of it, but I can talk about some of it. So I founded it with Rafi Krikorian, who's the former VP of engineering at Twitter and CTO of Emerson. And, initially I was having conversations with my buddy Ian Bremmer. We were talking about democracy and technology and what is the most useful thing you could build in the world if you wanted to improve the way democracy works. We'll build a conversation platform.
Yep.
It went off, and we've been working on this for a long time. And so then, as you know, and probably some of your listeners know, because I invited a whole bunch of people who are connected to the two of us, we built a little prototype. And we called it Narwhal. There's a little bit of press, so I'm not saying anything that wasn't in the media. We built a thing called Narwhal, and the idea was, could you have a conversation platform where all the incentives are designed to drive people to positive conversations, where you make sure you onboard people from real political diversity, right? So I sometimes note that I was the most frequent commenter, and the second most frequent was our friend Johnny, who was Trump's evangelical advisor, right? You build a platform where you have ideological diversity. You make sure when people come on board, you message that this is a place for civil conversations. We started implement, and then you rate the conversations not by sort of sugar rush, but by quality, right? And you have people click and say, "Oh, I learned something from it. Aha, I learned something from this conversation," or it was provocative, it was clarifying, and then you sort them based on that. Then, we launched this thing in the middle of the AI revolution. So Rafi, who's fabulous, used to run AI at Uber, builds a really cool summarizer. So you come into a conversation, and like a good dinner party host, it'll tell you what's going on. You put in a URL, it will tell you good conversations to have. So we ran that, and we ran it for a few months, and it was amazing, right? We had, I think, 500 conversations. It's a small community of just people that we've invited or have heard of it, friends of friends. And of those 500 conversations, there was essentially no toxicity, right? It developed a culture where you had really good outcomes, positivity, and it sort of exceeded our highest expectations for quality. What was hard, though, is what is the business model of this thing going to be, right? How are we going to get the hundreds of millions of people to use it that we're going to need to make any conceivable business model work, right? And so a little while ago, we were like, oh, actually, why don't we take this thing that we've built, and why don't we take this technology and take this culture and start to build it out on new places on the internet? Instead of having only a custom site where we're bringing people in, let's find partners, and we've got this awesome technology, right? We've got this cool use of AI. So we'll have more to say on that, but how's it going? It's going great. We're raising money right now. Amazing. That's going fabulously. We have a killer small team. Rafi is the CEO. I'm CEO of the Atlantic, which is, a reasonably rigorous job. So he's doing that, but the team's great. The product's great. And the announcements that are coming soon are going to be super cool. And I hope that everybody listening will, we've renamed it. It was, Narwhal, which kind of named after one of my kids' stuffed animals. It's now Speakeasy AI, which has something you can actually maybe figure out what we do from it, as opposed to the old name, which told you nothing about what we did and you couldn't spell. So off we go. It's really fun. It's been cool. It's been a great journey to kind of be involved in startup world, fundraising world, product world, engineering world. It's been great.
You mentioned hundreds of millions of people. You're appealing to a certain type of person, right? You're in some ways you're appealing to the maybe the same type of person that would read the Atlantic or read the Economist or something like that. You're not appealing to somebody who would watch TV news, right? Almost pretty much anyone who would watch TV news seems like to be a very different person than would kind of want something like this. Like how do you archetype those people? How do you think about that? That core user.
Well, so when it was Narwhal, right? When it is a site and we're trying to get you there, and it's all all conversations, and they're all I don't know, what do you think about copyright and AI, right? You're not getting everybody into those conversations. You're getting a subset of people. But with a new model where
so you could be on the New York Times, and you could use the technology and where those people already are.
Yeah, maybe you could imagine the technology being embedded. I mean, it's not, but just hypothetically, you could imagine it anywhere on Reddit, right? And you can imagine some of the tools we've built, being helpful and useful and leading to better experience in all kinds of subreddits. So
But in some of those communities, I mean, Reddit already does a very good job because it's almost like the moderator
Right.
is a dictator, and they get to decide how it goes. So in many ways, like they've actually figured it out of how to have real
Well,
conversations. And if you don't, you just leave, right? So you go to a different community
yes
that's
and no.
out
I mean,
there.
Reddit's incredible, right? God bless that place.
Yeah,
They following a conversation on Reddit is pretty hard, right? Trying to figure out where you are and like
that's true. Yeah, it is. It is like you have no idea even how to start sometimes and
then the
understand
mechanism
what's
for
going
sorting
on.
the
Yeah,
conversation is pretty crude, right? And so, and that
yeah,
necessarily because you build a product in whatever year all of those mechanisms were built, right? It was when I was first at Wire, because I remember we
yeah,
acquired them, like the most amazing acquisition Condé Nast ever did. And like these four guys were sitting in a glass bubble
yeah.
in the Wired offices. Who knew? um, like they paid $25 million for Reddit back then, which is, wow, what all that money for this?
That
Yes.
was an
So the
amazing
people
deal.
think that
Yeah.
say that journalist executives aren't smart. Like people make fun of Condé Nast, right?
Yeah.
Just remember Condé Nast bought Reddit for $25 million. Um, but
That
so
was
they're sort
incredible.
of tied to technology, infrastructure, and design that was made a long time ago, and it's hard to change because your users don't want change, right? And so, could you build a conversation platform with much more sophisticated threading, much more sophisticated sorting? Yes, you can. Have we figured that out at Speakeasy? I'd like to think that what we've got is great. Will it work? Would it work at the scale of Reddit? Who knows? But we'll see.
Now, a couple personal questions. You're an avid runner. You mentioned
Yeah.
you're writing a book about running. You're one of the fastest marathon runners in your age bracket. What does running bring, like, basically to your life? Like, why is it so
Why is it
interesting
so
to you?
interesting to me? Okay, so
I mean, because for people like me, like it is literally one of the most boring things I can imagine doing. Um, and maybe if I have a good podcast or something like that, I can get through it. But like there are people like you who just love it and swear by it, and so like why
okay,
does it appeal to you so
let's
much? And obviously you're
so
good at
that
it, which is
helps, right?
great,
And maybe
right? So
that
you're
like
also good at it. Yeah,
would
yeah,
I love it
yeah,
as much as I
yeah,
wasn't good at it? Like obviously I was born with genetic talent, blah blah blah.
yeah,
So I view it in some ways it's my form of meditation, and so I go out and there's the thing about running is you do it and it's just you, right? It's unlike any other sport, right? You
yeah,
usually wear shoes. You don't even have to wear shoes, right? And you go out there and
yeah.
you're in a shirt and a t-shirt, right?
I usually wear shorts too, so I don't want people
But you don't have
seeing,
to, right?
me
But
naked and
like,
stuff. But
and actually, it's a rare sport where you go faster, like the less you wear, right? This is why the racers are wearing very, very thin shorts,
yeah,
right? So anyway, so you're out there and you're just you, and that allows you both to be in a very different mental space from any other sport. Like even playing tennis, where it's you have a racket and you have an opponent, right? And you have a ball, right? And
yeah,
so it puts you in a different spiritual sense. And then it also, like your success or your failure, again, doesn't involve your opponent. It doesn't involve the ball. It doesn't involve the racket. It just
yeah.
involves you. And so it's a very intense sport psychologically, and it's also very freeing, and it's in some ways spiritual. And so I use it.
And you're competing against yourself from a year ago, yourself
Yep.
from 6 months
Yep.
ago,
And
et cetera.
that's hard because when you reach our age, that's like the you of 6 months ago is probably better than the you now.
Yeah,
But it creates
yeah,
interesting challenges too. So I love the psychological benefits for you. Also, right? I've built running into my life in a way that's very healthy. So we're talking this in the morning. I ran into work. I wake up, I work. My kids get up, I play with my kids. I don't know, we planted a little garden. We did some homework. I take them to school. I run to the office. I work. I run home. I play with my kids. I work again, right? Like it gives me a break
yeah,
in the day of however long it took, 35 minutes to run in. And
yep,
in a way that even like riding the subway and like frantically doing email while standing on my phone and like kind of pressed against the bar, like isn't going to give me. Like I'm running across. Maybe I listened to Tech Meme Ride Home in Hard Fork this morning, right? So I'm learning a little bit about tech. I'm running across the Manhattan Bridge. I don't know.
yeah.
It frees me up mentally in a way that's quite useful to me.
Now one of the things you're known for is you ran a much faster marathon at age 44 than you did
Yeah.
at age 30. In some ways, and you're already super fast at age 30. So it's not like you went from, starting at zero. Like, how do you think about like reversing or slowing your own
Yeah.
aging?
It's a kind of interesting journey. So like in short, I was very good in high school, one of the best in the state, but not the best. And then I went to Stanford, which is national champion team, and I wasn't good enough to cut it. Right, so I left, stopped after my freshman year. I was the first kid on a national champion winning team to leave the team. Right, so I was like the worst at the
Uh-huh.
best. And then I don't really run too much through my 20s, and I start marathoning again, kind of like as a hobby, not that seriously. And I run 3 hours and change. Then I run a little under 3 hours. And then when I'm 30, I run 2:43, which is very good. Okay. And then I have this very intense thing that happens. I get diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Like it was like literally right after the marathon. And I go through a horrible health scare, terrifying, particularly at that age. I come out of it. And 2 years later, I run a marathon again, and I run 2:43 again. And then for a decade, I run pretty much every marathon. My teammates used to call me Mr. 243, right? I run pretty much the same time. Like I run a couple 242s, I run a 245, 246, and once I get a 239. But like basically I'm running exactly the same for a decade. And so I think of it as like in that decade, I'm like,
You
I
kind
hit
of
a
hit a
plateau, but it's interesting because
plateau.
I'm also aging, right? So I'm learning more. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm an escalator, like I'm going up the escalator because I'm learning a little more every year, and I'm going down the escalator because I'm getting older, right? And like my job's getting harder, so I
Yep.
have less time and all that. So then I stay sort of totally constant.
Though in marathons, it's not clear when the
Yeah.
peak is, right? It's not, it's because it does seem like a lot of marathoners, or some woman I think who won a marathon
Yeah, you
recently at
could be a
age
little bit
40,
older, right? If you
right?
look at the top 1,500 meter runners in America, they're all under 30. If you look at the top marathoners, many of them are over. Now, part of that is because people go to the marathon older. Part of it is
Yep.
because there are benefits of like cumulative distance, all that, right? Like capillary density, and then like the things that you lose, you tend to lose your explosive power before you lose your endurance. But in any case, once you get your
Yep.
30s, you tend to slow down. So I'm sort of stuck at that. And then when I'm 43, my father, who's the one who introduced me to the sport, my father has died. And I'm like thinking about the sport kind of in a more intense way. I get this email from Nike, and they're like, hey, we want to run an experiment where we'll pair you with a real coach. And part of me is like, I don't have time for that. And part of me is like, no, my dad wanted me to do this, I do this, right? So the coach, this guy, Steve Finley, right? And another guy named Brett Kirby, who's a physiologist out in Portland. I sit down with Steve, and Steve's like, okay, how do you train? I talk through it. And then, okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. And he listens to that first conversation. He and I just recently talked about that first conversation. He's like, I remember I was standing in the rain in a gazebo. I was like, this guy's doing it all wrong. Like he could do so much better, right?
Oh,
And
interesting.
so
Okay.
Steve, working with Brad, another guy, Joe Holder, but it's really Steve who I'm talking to all the time, like figures out different ways I should train, right? And says, okay, actually you should do this instead of this. You should do this. And then you should drink this instead of this. But it's mostly about pushing my body in ways I hadn't pushed before. And so he puts me on this program, and I ran a 243. I meet him. I run a 238. 6 months later, I run a 234. And then 6 months later, I run a 229. And COVID hits, but then we come out of COVID, and then I set the American record in the 50K, right? And so it's like this crazy progression over a couple of years. So part of what's happening is he's telling me new ways to train. But the other thing that happens, right, and this is the most interesting, because I've spent a lot of time thinking like, why did I get that much better, right? Like, you change like a standard deviation in your finishing table. And I think part of the answer was that when I was in my 30s and I'm running all these 243s, I didn't conceive of it as being possible that I could run a 229 or a 234, in part because of the sickness and in part because of the cancer I'd gone through. I just sort of wanted to be as good as I was before I got sick. And so
you didn't even have a desire
like at some
to be
deep
much
level,
better.
like I didn't have a desire. It didn't occur to me. Like all I wanted was that. And somehow he like reset my goals and expectations. Now, like, could he have taken me to run a 215? I don't think so. I mean, who knows what would have happened if I'd like kept going with him and never gotten hurt or hadn't been COVID and all that. But like, it's kind of amazing what they did. And it's, that's.
But you're saying there's a site, like it was kind of like when Roger Bannister, broke the 4-minute mile. All of a sudden, all these other people broke it really quickly afterwards, because it's like they realized it was possible.
Yeah.
It was more just like you had a different set of expectations.
This is one of the crazy things about running that's so interesting, right? So this happened to me when I was in high school. So I started running because I was cut from the basketball team. Like I didn't join the track team at my high school. And I was a sophomore, and I go out and I run the 2 mile, and I run it in like 11 minutes and 43 seconds. And so I go and I run like the whole year, and I'm running like 11:30 to 11:43, which is okay. It's like bad high school varsity, good high
Hmm.
school JV, like
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
And then there's a meet, and it's the like New England Championships. You can enter two people. The coach enters me, which is very nice of him. But the track is a different size. And so I don't know how fast I'm running, right? I don't understand the splits, right? I don't even know, it's a different number of laps to the mile. And I finish and they're like, you just ran at 10:48. I'm like, what? I was like mind blown. I remember going through the mile and they're like 5:25. I'm like, they have it wrong, right? But it
Hmm.
was like one of those times where I realized in running that because it's just you, right? Because it's just you and it's so mental. Like back to the thing I said at the beginning,
Yep.
because it's so mental and it's so personal, like you are limited by yourself in fascinating, complicated ways. And so there have been a couple times in my life, namely when I ran that 10:48 and then when I ran the 2:29, where I've realized like I've been like holding myself back. Now, there also it's physiological again. Like, have I been holding myself back from like running at 2:10? Like, I don't think so. But
Yeah.
that's part of why I'm so interested in this sport.
Are you doing anything from like an anti-aging perspective? And we've had a bunch of anti-aging researchers on this podcast, like Nir Bruzali and David Sinclair. Are you doing anything that that you think it would be like interesting for other people to
Not
try?
really. I mean, I don't think I do anything. I eat a healthy diet and drink a lot of water. But I'm not
Yep.
like taking resveratrol pills or injecting chipmunk blood. But like, I mean, I guess the one thing I do is I guess another thing that you know, talking to the sports physiologists, like they made me sleep more, right? And like pay more attention to your sleep and be more.
Yep.
I mean, it sounds so stupid, but right,
Yeah, and that's pretty common nowadays. It seems like
it's
everyone
pretty
is
it's
talking
pretty
about
good and
sleep,
does
right?
make you recover
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, like,
Yeah.
so I do like maybe I'm being a little flip. Like I am pretty serious about what I'm drinking. I drink beet juice in the morning, right? And I have a bowl of oatmeal and nuts, right? I often have like protein before I go to bed because it helps muscle repair, right? I make sure to sleep, right? Like I do a whole bunch of stuff. I do like certain exercises to limit my risk of injuries, which is like one of the huge problems when you're old. I spend a lot of time. Like one of the things
Yep.
that happens as you get old is that you slow down, right? And the reason we slow down is there are all kinds of reasons we slow down, but one of the interesting ones is that we accumulate bad habits in our body and how we hold ourselves, or we sprain our ankle, and because we sprain our right ankle, we land a little bit on our left, and then it makes our back a little crooked, right? And over the years, this
Yep.
perfect body that emerges in the world when you're born gets all screwed up. One of the things that I've been blessed with is when I was young, I was a musician, and I spent a lot of time playing guitar, and I injured myself pretty badly, and I couldn't play guitar, and I had like a year where I couldn't get out of it. And then I met someone who taught me this thing called the Alexander technique, which is a way of holding your body and positioning yourself while you do something. And so that actually has been a really important part of not getting hurt and not developing bad physical habits. And so I've had an injury the last few months, but I went sort of like 15 years without missing a workout or missing a day. And I think a large part of that
Wow.
was because of the Alexander technique, right? And learning how to hold my body, which it's not an anti-aging technique, but it's something that helps counteract the effects of aging.
Yeah, well, if you can just reduce injury, even as you mentioned, even small injuries like kind of like hurting your ankle a bit or something like that, if you can just do that, like that really changes your quality of
Totally.
life as you get
And
older.
it completely like the way to.
Because almost everyone I know, even once hit their 40s, they've got a back thing, their shoulder, they got a knee problem. It's they're constantly having these like little things that really
Totally.
just slow
And
them
like
down.
the way to get fit is to stay fit, right? And so I've been like, again, it's weird to say this now where I injured myself. I was trying to run this 50 miler in the snow in November and I hurt my Achilles, right? So I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I've been dealing with the problem, but up until that moment where I did something maybe a little excessive, the Alexander technique was enough.
Now, a couple
Sure.
more personal questions. I often kind of like think of people as like insiders versus outsiders, and I guess when I think of you much more of an insider. Like, how do you think of
That's an interesting
yourself?
question. So define insider and outsider.
An insider who maybe works with the system, let's say a successful insider versus successful outsiders. An insider would work within the system, help reform the system, take on, work within the institutions, have some sort of great belief in those institutions. An outsider might be, more willing to create new institutions, or try to go around them or create new things. Insider is, somebody who has respect from other insiders. Yeah. Outsider usually has less respect from those other insiders. And both are obviously very important in our
I'm more
society.
of an insider, but I think actually I'm probably a mix of the two sides of my family, right? So my mother's side of the family, very, very rules-based, very insider-based. My grandfather was arms controller, worked for the U.S. government, every president, Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan, more or less, like ultimate insider, right? Fights with them and is fired by 8 out of 11 administrations, works his way back in, but a real insider institution, American democracy. My dad, much more of an iconoclast, right? And he grows up in Oklahoma. He's a rule breaker. He sort of escapes his family in a certain way. He comes and marries my mother, and then tries to blow up the Washington world. That comes out of the closet and decides he wants to try to burn everything down, right? And so I like to think that I'm an insider and that I'm mostly like my mother, but I hope with a little bit of the good side of my dad's spirit. And so I work at the Atlantic, which is great. I went to all these great schools, and I'm CEO of a media institution that was founded in 1857. I work for Lorene Powell Jobs, right? I'm not out there that's insider by your definition. Yeah.
Bomb throwing, right. Yeah.
Founded a company called The Atavists, right? Founded a cool media company, founded Speakeasy. Do take certain risks. So I hope that I'm an insider with, I hope a little bit of that outsider spirit that I've inherited.
Yep. Okay. I would agree with that. Last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Oh, that's a great question. And about work, about life, about
anything. Yeah.
About any.
Could even be about running.
About running. Let me see if I can answer it for running. Okay, well, here, I'll just take a very specific one, right? So there's only because I had a conversation about this yesterday where, there's a sense that to run a marathon, you just need to do a 20-miler, right? If you do a 20-miler, you're going to be good. And it's not true, right? The way the body works when you run something into that extreme is you're taxing a whole bunch of systems in a way you've never taxed before. And the first one to fail means the end of the race, right? That's when you collapse, right? And so let's say there are 20 systems in your body that can fail. When you overload one, that's when your body falls apart. So the way to train for a marathon, and I think I'll get to the point about life once I finish my thing about marathoning. So the way to train for a marathon is you have to train every of those systems. You can't train them all to the intensity that you will in a marathon, but you have to train them all to a degree that they won't be overtaxed on marathon day. So the way I train for a marathon is sometimes I run more than 26 miles. Sometimes I'll go for a run totally dehydrated, right? Because that'll train my body to run when I'm as dehydrated. I'll run 20 miles while dehydrated, which is the same as running 26 when you're drinking water. I will run if I have I won't eat breakfast and I'll go for a long run. I will run down a mountain in bad shoes, right? So what you're doing is because that'll stress your quads more. So what you're doing is you're setting up, the way to train is not to align everything as much as you can and then train as well as you can. It's to kind of make everything wrong a little bit. It's a little bit of wrong theory for training.
Yep.
And what it does is it means that when I'm on marathon day and my quads, they've never run 26 as fast as the marathon in training because you can't do it. The whole point of it is you only do it once. Otherwise, if you could do it more than once, then you're not going fast enough. And so, but the quads, at least they'll have known that day when I ran down the mountain, they'll have hurt as much as they do that day at the New York Marathon or the Boston Marathon, right? And my gut will be as trained as it was, right? So anyway, and I think it's a good lesson for life in that sometimes you want to tax yourself in really weird ways as a way to prepare yourself for whatever comes next. So there you go. That was a weird answer.
Yeah, that's real. I love that. No, that's a great answer. Well, this has been amazing. Thanks, Nick Thompson, for joining us at World of DaaS. I follow you. I don't know how much you're on Twitter anymore, but I definitely follow you on Twitter, NX Thompson on Twitter. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you. This has been
so much fun, Auren. I've
fun.
loved getting to know you over the years. I'm so glad you invited me on this. This was a great conversation. And now, next time I see you, I'm going to turn all the questions on you.